We tend to have one moral system for this, which is maximize equality under the constraint of maximizing GDP, let's say. So it's very simple. So we want to maximize the size of the pie, but try to at the same time, try to maximize equality. Okay, so that's how we think about the problem.
The Rational View is a weekly series hosted by me, Dr. Alan Scott, providing a rational, evidence-based perspective on important societal issues.
Produced by Soapbox Media.
The world needs evidence-based public policy now more than ever. Making the right decisions should not be partisan politics. Please help spread The Rational View by going to patron.podbean.com/The Rational View. Together, we can make a better future.
Hello and welcome to another episode of The Rational View. I'm your host, Dr. Al Scott. In this episode, have you ever felt that there's too much injustice in the world and you just can't respond to it all? Have you ever found yourself making a compromise with your ethics just to make it through the day? I think we all have. My guest today has written a book looking at these trade-offs. Hopefully he can help us all to be able to make moral choices and address the guilt we might feel at not being able to help everyone. If you like what you're hearing, please press like on your podcast app and come chat with me on my Facebook group, The Rational View. David Thesmar is the Franco Modigliani Professor of Financial Economics and Professor of Finance at the MIT Sloan School of Management. In 2007, he was named France's best young economist by Le Monde. With Augustin Landier, he writes a regular column for the French daily newspaper Les Echos. Dr. Thesmar, welcome to The Rational View.
Thank you very much for having me, Al. Thanks a lot. It's a pleasure to be here.
So you have just co-authored a book called The Price of Our Values, The Economic Limits of a Moral Life. That sounds like a very interesting title. What led you to putting this book together? Tell me a little bit about the background and what went into this.
Yeah, of course. I mean, so there are several reasons. There's several entry points into that topic. So the first entry point is I think that Augustin and I have been involved in policy discussions in France and Europe for a long time. And, I came to the US in 2015, but before that, I spent first part of my career in France, as you can hear, I guess. And we tried to, and we spent quite a lot of energy trying to advocate, economic efficiency to French people and trying to discuss, trying to teach economics to French people who are a bit averse to markets, etc. And so we spent probably 15 years, writing op-eds, writing books, trying to make some pedagogy of economics and trying to say, markets are not so bad. Sometimes they don't work, but, in general, it's good to have free trade. It's good to, balance the budget. It's good to sort of, standard mainstream economic views. Mm-hmm. And, industrial policy doesn't work that well, things like this. And
right.
And so we spent a lot of time arguing this, and we kept getting the same pushback that, people would say, oh, yes, that's all very nice, but I don't really buy it. And we tried really hard, for 15 years to, use evidence that was produced by academics, producing our own evidence, but there would always be a pushback. And after a few years, it sort of dawned on us, in a sense, that maybe the reason why people were pushing back was that, in fact, they were thinking, no, but economics is not everything. Mm-hmm. And it would never be exactly said this way. Sometimes it would, but not always. But in fact, we sort of sensed in the various, debates we had in various capacities that, people would say, oh, but we are not willing to compromise. Okay, I can give you an example. For instance, the minimum wage is in France, the minimum wage is very high. Like in US, it's lower, so it's less of an issue. But in France, it's extremely high. It's probably the highest in the world, or after Luxembourg or something like that. So very high minimum wage. So what economists would say is very simple. When the minimum wage is high, everybody whose productivity is below the minimum wage will not find a job.
I see.
And so that's why in France you have a lot of unemployment, especially for people who didn't go to school or didn't go to the university, or don't have the proper degree or proper skills. And people would say to us, no, but it's not the only thing that matters. What matters also is when you work, there's a sense of dignity. Dignity is important. I need adequate pay.
Right.
I want something that is, I want to be recognized as someone who contributes to society. And if I get not much money for what I do, then it's not so much that it's, but I won't have enough to support my family and so on and so forth. But even if the government kind of subsidizes work, as was suggested by various, economists, like if you're not very productive, essentially companies will not pay you much, but then there will be some government subsidies that will come on top of it, and that will make the overall compensation adequate. People will say,
right.
No, I don't want that. That's not something I want, because I want to be adequately compensated by my employer as my contribution to society. And so that's just an example to tell you, when you discuss those mainstream economic things with people or with even politicians or even reporters, sometimes, they say, oh, but economics is not all that matters. There's something else that we want to uphold. There are moral values we want to uphold.
Yes, the and ethical
maybe,
needs.
We can make sacrifices.
It's definitely a quandary. It's something for me that, being brought up in a Christian family, there's always been the moral quandary and talking about the title, The Economic Limits of a Moral Life. The Bible is pretty clear that you should give away all of your possessions to live a Christian life. But this behavior, it's not, conducive to eating, or, it's not really modeled by modern Christians either. How does one align the greater good with one's personal interests? What's the moral? What's the moral choice here?
Okay. So, I can give you several levels of answers. So there's the level, how do one do this? Does one do this? It's a question for priests or philosophers, or, I'm neither. And neither Augustin nor I actually claim to be either. We've read a little bit of this, and so we know, we know our classics, but there are various ways, and there have been over the time, various religions, but also ethical systems that have been developed by philosophers to try to tell people how to think about balancing this, and that I can discuss a little bit more later on. But what we think is important in this book is that people need to be aware of the tension. They should not deny that those tensions exist. Exactly like in your example of the Bible, like, should you give away everything? Yes, if you do, then there's nothing left for you. So the saints may actually, end up there, but most of us are not like this. And so that's a very simple tension that will arrive, but there are many other tensions you can think about. For instance, one that we discuss at length in the book in various situations is why do we have museums? Why does the government subsidize museums, for instance? Okay. Maybe there's a better use of that money can be done than maybe we can, I don't know, donate it to struggling people in our own countries, or maybe you can sell the Smithsonian to a private buyer and use the proceeds to I don't know, to feed poor American families, or even poor African families for that matter. So those tensions always exist.
Right. There's always endless injustice and unnecessary suffering in the world. Shouldn't we be angry at everything?
Exactly.
Should we always prioritize that above everything else? And do we have to fix the injustice before we can enjoy our lives or do anything? So your book addresses this problem. What framework do you use to address this problem?
The framework is simple. This is the reason why also it's coming from us as economists. is that you can't have your cake and eat it too. It's the simple thing that there is no completely free lunch in a sense. That there's a trade-off. So for instance, you can get a more efficient economy, for instance, by freeing the markets, lowering the tariffs to zero, and then you will increase GDP, and you lower taxes on the wealthy so that they invest more and create more firms, etc. Or you lower
neoliberal
taxes.
view.
That's the sort of the neoliberal view, exactly. Yes. Exactly, yes. Because you increase the size of the cake, so you increase GDP. But of course, that comes at some significant costs of various forms. So you can have more inequality. So that's kind of, it hurts your value of fairness, of justice. It may also hurt your notion of meritocratic fairness, in the sense that maybe a society like this would give a huge head start to children of wealthy families as opposed to children of poorer families. And therefore, that would also hurt our notion of not equalitarian fairness, but more like meritocratic fairness. There will be a lot of costs like this, or maybe, it will lead the US to be completely open to imports from other countries, and then maybe collectively as a nation to lose the sense of making our own stuff. I don't know. Some people might be sensitive to, this notion of collective dignity, in a sense, that's related to having closer borders and doing our own stuff that we consume, etc. So all those things will come as a cost of, having freer markets. So in a sense, you're kind of always trading off, economic efficiency and upholding your moral values. Okay, so that seems like fairly obvious when I say it. It's not a surprise. You can say, okay, maybe I will not enjoy vacations under the sun because I don't want to contribute to global warming, for instance, things like this. There are plenty of examples like this. So there are plenty of examples like this. And so where we think it's an interesting message is that when you say it like this, it's obvious, but the spontaneous reaction of people when you confront this to this kind of trade-offs is denial. Think of politics, for instance. It never happens that the politician would say, okay, I defend this moral view on the ground that it is moral, and I'm willing to sacrifice economic growth for it. No, it's always, it's a win-win proposition. It's moral and it's good. Okay, and
there's never difficult decisions to be made in the realm of politics. Yeah. So if you listen to a politician talk,
people. Yes, people really. It's true. Like people really struggle acknowledging those trade-offs. I think. The denial is the really natural thing to do. So especially when you talk about trade. So these days we talk a lot about tariffs and free trade and imports, etc. Competition. Yes. People think it's good. It's good to be. It's going to be good for people's wallets. That it's going to create jobs, or if it doesn't create jobs, at least it reshores very strategic and important high-tech activities to the US. Gives us a collective control over our collective destiny. Because we're going to master the technology. We'll be at the forefront of whatever, etc.
Free trade, you're saying, is a collective
free trade.
good.
Yes, not free trade. Closing our borders.
Closing our
borders. Yes, control industrial policy, sort of, you can think of it also as a similar kind of set of policies where, non-neoliberal policies, And, what economists have been documenting for a while on various things is that, those non-neoliberal policies, they're typically costly, but maybe that's not what matters. The problem is that, politicians never confront people with the cost of their decisions. Recently we've seen that,
this is one of the key reasons that I have this podcast, is to bring back rational discussion to the public forum, to cost these decisions and look at the merit function of, cost versus benefit of these decisions, because it's just missing from the whole debate, it seems.
Exactly.
So, I'm glad. Exactly. So I'm glad you're looking at that.
No, but it's going both ways. You're right. So it's at the same time maybe being fully economically efficient, generate some kind of, moral monstrosity, like we have to accept intolerable levels of inequality or other problems. But at the same time, upholding moral values always comes with a cost. I mean, it comes with a cost.
Yes.
And so,
we could look at the example of like clothing, right? I mean, that clothing workers in Asia are exploited, even slave labor in some sweatshops, children, this is evidenced, and people go and try to audit it. It's very difficult to find North American made clothing, for example, because it's also very expensive if you can find it. You go into a store and ask them if they have any North American brands, and the answer is usually no. And few people can afford to not support the sweatshop clothing industry. And most of us just feel guilty, but take these sweet threads stitched by the hands of starving children and wear them.
No, absolutely. No, exactly. Yes, exactly. And it's a bit of a disgusting alternative in a sense. It's the idea is that there is these trade-offs. Why don't we like them? So there's a famous psychologist, cognitive and moral psychologist. His name is Philip Tetlock. So I don't know if you know about him. He's written interesting stuff on forecasting. Yes. And so he talks about various types of trade-offs that people face. So you've got the market trade-offs. So market trade-offs is, do I buy, I don't know, a t-shirt or a shirt, a banana or an apple, I go on vacation or save to buy a car, things like this. This is very peaceful. This is just a trade-off. We act as calculator. We try to think about the cost and benefits of both decisions. No problem. Then you got the tragic trade-offs. So tragic trade-offs, according to Tetlock, are those that, pit one moral value against another. So it's more like, should I bury my brother so that he has a good, that is, he's not condemned to hell in his afterlife, or should I, obey my king who orders me not to do it? So there is a stuff of Greek tragedies, of human tragedies, novels, etc. And this is tragic, but this is just tragic. Okay, so we've seen it. It's in movies. It's everywhere. And then you've got what he calls the sacrilegious trade-offs. So sort of trade-offs that have on one side an economic arm, and on the other side a moral arm. And those trade-offs. So he has this theory. I don't know how much we need to believe it, but he has this theory that we're almost hardwired to hate those trade-offs. Because it means that we will, in a sense, that everything is for sale, in a sense. That if moral is for sale, then, everything is for sale. We should not trust people who do this. It's people who will not, that will be sacrilegious people, so they will not respect the natural order of things. They will not respect God or, whatever form of, transcendence you believe in. And these are not people that you want to be in business with, in a sense. These are people that are always for sale, in a sense. And so that's. I mean, I don't know.
And
that
that's
we should,
people that buy clothing from made in China. Is that
exactly? I mean,
don't trust them.
But we don't want to think this about ourselves, that we're for sale. I think we hate that. I don't think we want to accept this. So we always tell ourselves nice little stories, bedtime stories, where actually, in fact, no, but those children are maybe, that's a way for them to go to school, because they get, some money and their parents can send them to school.
Yes, capitalism is rising the standard of living in these extremely poor places.
For instance,
so that's always the nice, soothing story that you can see. Now they have 2 bowls of rice a day instead of 1.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I mean, not that I think that's true to some extent, that it lifts, that capitalism lifts people out of poverty. That's my own belief. But at least, that's just an example of when we're in these situations where we've got to peel, our moral self against our economic self. It's we prefer not to accept those trade-offs. Another example that is fairly that we discuss in the book is about this very expensive therapy that exists for neurodegenerative diseases. So there's so there's this example in Brazil that went to trial all the way to the Supreme Court, where the parents of a kid whose disease was diagnosed at year 2, 2 years old, and so there was a cure actually for this disease. And if you let it run, then it's terrible. It's it only goes downhill from there. The kid is really just in a worse and worse shape and eventually dies quite young. So it's terrible, really. And you can save the life of this kid for a drug, but that drug costs $10 million.
Wow.
So that's extremely expensive. And so the parents demanded that the public health system in Brazil covers this bill. They didn't have enough money to pay for it. But so they sued the Brazilian government, and it went all the way to the Supreme Court. And in the end, I think the Supreme Court decided that, I don't know what it decided. I think it decided that, sided with the parents. Because, of course, who wants to condemn the kid to,
that's a horrible choice.
Death and suffering, and $10 million, what is it compared to the life of a kid?
But then you look on the other hand, the $10 million could have saved many lives from poverty.
Exactly. So that's the trade-off, yes. But those are, so I don't know. What I think is that it's statistical lives, so it doesn't somehow count as much, I think. But maybe it's also the fact that we would not, neither you nor I would want, nor any listener, I think, would want to be in a position to have to make that decision. It's a terrible decision.
This is the moral quandary of the one versus the many, right? This is
exactly, yes.
Exactly. If it's the one person it's much more important than the many people you don't know. But the trolley problem is writ large here. You understand rationally that it's better to save more people and not apply high-end solutions to single people that would then impoverish hundreds of people. So how do you overcome this human tendency to distort statistics and not think rationally?
So it's really hard.
Or should
I'm not sure. So we have a solution. We propose a solution in the book, but I'm not sure it's an easy solution. So the solution is really to face the trade-off in its complexity, in a sense, and sort of not rely on one simple moral system. I think that's in a sense the message of the book. The book is a message of the message of the book is of pluralism, to try to think about various approaches to the same problem. And then there's not going to be a simple answer, but at least you need to be able to debate this with yourself, ideally with others, and take various standpoints. So what we think is toxic is to have only one moral system. And economists have a little bit of that. Not all of them, but us as a community, we tend to have one moral system for this, which is maximize equality under the constraint of maximizing GDP, let's say. So it's very simple. So we want to maximize the size of the pie, but try to at the same time, try to maximize equality. Okay, so that's how we think about the problem.
And those are weighted equally for economists?
It's complicated. It's hard to tell. I mean, it depends on the people, etc. But sort of, that's the. It's in the DNA of our profession, So it's Jeremy Bentham in a sense. So it's really utilitarianism, So that's, and the modern incarnation of this is effective altruism, which is to say we should go for maximum equality. So try to, but of course, the problem is that if we have exact equality, then of course the human nature is such that, it's going to struggle to produce any form of GDP. So that's sort of the communism experiment in a sense. So human nature is such that people respond to incentives. So you cannot tax them to death. If you want them to produce, you cannot tax them too much, etc., etc. So we incorporate those constraints. But, for instance, one direction in which economists are pretty clear is, something that increases both the size of GDP and equality is meritocracy. So we are very meritocratic. We think, best people should be given the more chance and, should be rewarded the best because they contribute more to society, and that will create a society that is just and, efficient at the same time. And so that's, in a sense, utilitarianism / effective altruism, and that's one moral viewpoint. It's the moral viewpoint of most economists, the moral viewpoint of a lot of people, actually. I mean, to some extreme degree sometimes, but it's. But we think, in fact, and this is where we read a little bit of philosophy, and we mentioned this in the book in many economic cases. It's not always generating the ideal. Or at least they are equally legitimate claims to the right thing to do, in a sense. And sort of, there are like three, essentially philosophers say there are three big branches of philosophy. There's utilitarianism, which is one, sort of, maximize the good for the greater number of people,
Mm-hmm.
But then there are two other approaches. One where, to do good, you've got to practice the good. So it's not just about like doing some good by signing good checks to charities that help people that are struggling, but it's also rolling up your sleeves and do good yourself.
Well, that's an interesting one. I think that probably doesn't play well amongst a lot of neoliberals. I mean,
it's very hard. Yes, it's very hard.
The neoliberal message is that greed is the market maker, and as long as you are not regulating your markets, that greed is good, right? It's just the opposite of that.
Yes. So greed is not good, but it's also even, it goes against effective altruism in the sense that effective altruism tells you, okay, what good can you do? If you come out of an Ivy League university and you're well educated, you can either, go and work. So we have a question like this. So in our book, we have plenty of questions where we sort of, ask people questions about those kind of trade-offs and see how they answer. And so sort of one of the prescription of effective altruism is to say, you want to do, is called earning to give. Okay. So earning to give is essentially saying, if you can make a ton of money in Wall Street trading currencies, let's say, then you should do that because then you can give it away. Rather than rolling up your sleeve, fly to Africa and build a school yourself with your own hands. Because you're not imagine you're not a very handy person, so you cannot do it yourself. And so actually when we subject people to that kind of alternative, either, you're a fictitious person who wants to do good straight out of college can, opt for one or the other option. Like work in Wall Street and donate, or or fly to Africa and contribute. More than half of the people, a vast majority of people, actually think that it's a better thing to do to actually go there and do good yourself.
Mm-hmm.
People don't think that signing a check is good.
I think a lot of people would feel that the person doing Wall Street is just taking from the poor to give to the poor.
That takes from another person who works in Wall Street, so I don't know exactly what it means. But you're right. It's a bit tricky. But,
we know that someone who's building a school is doing good for people, and it's coming from their own labor, whereas people that gamble on the stock market are taking money from people's pensions and distributing it themselves.
But there are people that are richer than young African kids, I guess. They're still richer. Yes, that could be an interpretation that people have. My understanding of what they have, and it would be worth actually asking more questions. Actually, it would be interesting. Mm-hmm. Is that people think that doing good is a bit like a muscle, so it's a bit like it's Aristotle, the Aristotelian kind of philosophy. So the idea is that the modern formulation of this is to say it's like going to the gym. You go to the gym you are gonna pump iron to have bigger muscles. And in order to have bigger muscles, you need to pump iron. So that's there's no other way. In order to be a good person, there's no other way than doing good yourself, in a sense. Cause possibly, in a sense, maybe that rejoins a little bit what you're saying is that possibly, if you go to Wall Street and trade all day long, maybe that will make you a worse person, or at least it won't make you as good as a person as if you were like actually,
It's somewhat Machiavellian. I think it's like the ends justify the means. So
Exactly.
yes, I've dirtied myself by being greedy and playing this game to get the money, but now I'm being good because I'm giving it away, and the ends justify the means.
Absolutely.
And yeah, my
exactly, the ends justify the means mentality sort of erodes your moral sense in a sense. It's sort of you lose your good muscle.
And you said there were three. You're going to is there a third?
And so the third one. So people may think this way, and it's not crazy, and that's not at all utilitarian. Utilitarians will tell you, you should rather, make as much money as you can, take it from people who donate less than you, and donate it all. So that's, of course, generates the ends justify the mean kind of mentality, which can be bad. And the second, the third, branch of ethic is deontological thinking, so Kantian ethics. So you do things because they are right, not because they are good. You're not trying to do good. You don't know what good is, but you do things that are right, just because it's independent on the consequence. You don't care about consequences. You're not consequentialist. Consequentialist is a term that was invented in the 60s, actually, and it was supposed to be, it's not considered as such anymore, but it was supposed to be a derogatory term for people who think about consequences and not people who are like thinking about doing what's right.
So could you give an example of the difference between doing something right and doing something
So that's
good?
very simple. In the trolley problem, you can save one person, you can save 5 people by killing one. And sort of, if you abide by the Kantian principle, the categorical imperative that, you should not use people as means, but, treat them as ends in themselves, so you cannot use someone by killing them to save 5 people. You're just not allowed to do it. And so you will let the 5 people die because you don't think you're entitled to make that call. You don't think you should do that. So it's a bit, it's related. All these things are a bit related. You can create bridges between those schools of thought. But in a sense, in the book, we give another example, which is, so the famous philosopher Peter Singer, for instance, who is an advocate of effective altruism, hardcore consequentialism, etc. So feels very guilty about the fact that he gave money to support his mother when she was sick. So towards the last years of her life, she was very sick. She needed, expensive nursing care, etc., that he could afford. And, rather than giving her a few additional years of life in better shape, he could have, rerouted that money and sent it to, causes that save much more lives, many more lives. But he hasn't done it. And that's a topic that you have in many interviews, and so reporters ask, how do you feel about that? And he says, I think it's not the right thing to do, but I did it nonetheless because it would have made me so unhappy and so sad that I couldn't do it, but it was a very selfish thing to do. And I think for most of us, that's a crazy thing to think about. Like it's very, very, I don't.
Would that be called utilitarian thinking, that you could help more people?
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay.
While you have the sort of the what is right is to do well by the person that are near you, in a sense that lay legitimate claim on you. It can be a principle. It can be a principle that you can live with.
But you advocate, balancing amongst all of these systems and taking your guidance by comparing all of them. And I think that's a reasonable thing, because how can you say which one is right?
Yes, I cannot. At least I'm not a trained philosopher, and I think even trained philosophers may not be able to.
Well, I'm sure there's arguments continuously amongst them about which moral system is correct, and I know that's an ongoing problem. You can't just say this is the moral system that we should listen. I mean, one of the biggest polarizing divides in society right now, in Western society, is which morality do you follow? The conservative morality to look out for the welfare of your family and your community before the welfare of your neighbor, or the liberal morality which empathizes globally with the less fortunate, and the both of them are valid moralities in a way.
Yes.
and you can't say that one is necessarily better than the other, although once you find yourself in a group, you certainly will.
No, absolutely, yes, absolutely.
But there's no objective way that I know of to distinguish between moralities. It's a human subjective construct to a certain extent, isn't it?
No, absolutely, you're right. And actually, even people are not even very. Where that's why sort of the pluralistic approach of saying there are many ways of thinking about these things. As an economist, as an academic economist, I write papers with data and I try to, get to the truth. And so I think there is some form of objective truth, and, I'm not at all postmodern, I don't, I'm not a French theory kind of guy, but,
but many people would say you don't exist in universities.
Maybe. No, but so I am not a postmodernist person at all. I'm not postmodern at all. I think there is a truth, but scientific truth. In terms of morality, I'm much more, it depends a lot, in fact, on people's history, on circumstances. It's a bit random also, and it's more the pluralistic approach is the right approach, where people have different viewpoints, and and it's really hard to make this work in the modern society, as we know. It's so polarized.
Most people aren't aware that there are different moral choices either. They're brought up with a moral choice, and that is morality to them, and they can't understand anyone with a different morality. It's like they're talking past each other.
Absolutely. Exactly. And so that's a problem. So maybe we can start at the level of the individual by making people aware that there are many ways of thinking about a problem, and some of them are preferable to others, and but none of them really dominates the others in a sense. In practice, it's interesting. There is a paper that I read recently, written by economists, actually, like people at the border of psychology and economics, where actually they were trying to check whether people are consequentialists. So they try to do the thing that is good, that maximizes the good, so sort of it has the best consequences possible. Mm-hmm. Or people were following principles, so people doing what's right but not what's good. Mm. And so they designed like several experiments, like, we discussed the trolley problem, where you can, you have the choice, you can kill one person to save 5, but that's a trade-off. So do you do it or not? So they designed other questions like this that were like kind of similar, like hypothetical or real. And what they found, which is really interesting and sort of goes in the pluralistic sort of direction, is that people were sometimes, the same person would be sometime principle-based and sometimes consequences-based. And some people would be utilitarian sometimes in some questions, the same person, and would be deontological, would be Kantian other times. And there was no real way to predict. So my reading of this paper is that it's a very interesting paper by Roland Benabou from Princeton. My reading of this is that when people are asked to lie, especially, they hate it. And there they have the principle of not lying, even if that has good outcomes. That's really something that they don't want to do.
Wow, yeah, that's true. It's an interesting thought experiment, as to, thinking about consequentialism. Some of the greatest evils in the world have been due to consequentialism gone wrong, right? You have this great model that you think you're leading us to, and you end up with the Holodomor, or you end up with, Lysenkoism, people dying because your idea was wrong.
Absolutely,
and to be able to do evil with some sort of good model at the end is dangerous if you're wrong. It's dangerous, and especially to the person you're doing evil to, no matter what happens.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a good reason to be pluralistic also. So pluralism is also helps you not put all your eggs in the same basket, all your idea, all your energy in one idea. You kind of, you reassess all the time. You know that you've got several options, and maybe if your view of the world, or even your view of the world turns out to be wrong, then you have to reassess and change and pivot, and so being trained to think outside of yourself, to think against yourself, in a sense, and to play the devil's advocate, and and not have only one system and think like in a more pluralistic way, it sort of avoids this kind of problem. You drive the entire society to destruction because you thought that was a good idea, but in fact it isn't. Yes, absolutely.
Very interesting. So, what would you say is the major message of your book? What's the major thesis? What thoughts would you like to leave us with on?
No, I think that the thought is this. So it's really there are plenty of situations in which our morality conflicts with our economic interests, or it clashes with our economic interests. So the book has many of these examples. So that's where I think it's interesting. So it's a lot of examples of all those problems that may arise. So we discussed a lot, justice and, equality and fairness and things like this, but it's also, for instance, beauty also, everything that's related to aesthetics also is also related to that. And sometimes, you may sacrifice economic efficiency to live things like you don't transform national parks into parking lots, for instance. Evil to do that. At least I think so, and many people would think so, I think. In many cases, we have these clashes between moral and economics, and our recommendation in this case is to confront them head on, to realize that they're trade-offs, to accept the idea that they're trade-offs, that they're not, we have to accept that. And so sometimes we sacrifice dollars for morals, sometimes we sacrifice some morals for dollars, because there are trade-offs everywhere, so we cannot always, do all the good we want to do. But so confront those trade-offs, and the tool to confront this is really to have a multi-pronged approach morally. So not rely on a single moral system, but really accept the pluralistic approach, get different opinions, try to get down to the moral arguments. And in the end, it's very likely that no moral argument dominates. But at least we'll have chosen, knowing why we have chosen what we have chosen why we have chosen it. Yes, and so that's in a sense the message of the book. Really, the idea of accepting the multiplicity of possibly good solutions, but not deny the moral cost of the economic cost of our moral decisions.
Merci beaucoup.
De rien.
It's been very, very good talking to you, Professor Thesmar. Thank you for telling us about your book. Very interesting discussions. And now I'm going to have to sit and think about all of this morality for a little while.
Thank you very much for having me on. Thanks a lot.
Bye-bye.
If you'd like to follow up with more in-depth discussions, please come find us on Facebook at The Rational View and join our discussion group. If you like what you're hearing, please consider visiting my Patreon page at patron.podbean.com/TheRationalView. Thanks for listening.